Now, just to start with something that, to put it all into context, when you come to this kind of event, the first thing that you are here for most often is to determine the finances that you're going to have going into retirement. And if you look at the agenda, the preponderance of items on the agenda have to do with housekeeping things like financial planning, the pension amount, the benefit amounts, how you protect yourself in retirement, et cetera. And that's perfectly wonderful. You do need to have all of that. But I want to call your attention to a study that was done by the Rand Corporation a few years ago, in which it followed a group of retirees over a 10-year period. At the beginning of the 10 years, they asked everybody participating to look at 10 items and to choose what for them going into retirement was their number one concern, and down to number 10 being what was their least concern. How many of you can guess from what I just said what was probably the number one concern going into retirement? Money. Absolutely. That was the choice. Now, the curious thing is that after 10 years of retirement, they discovered that what was number one going into retirement became number 10. And what was originally number 10 became number 1. Can you by any chance imagine what number 10 was going into retirement? Health? Happiness? Okay, you're sorry? Purpose? Where you live? Okay. Right. Absolutely. We need those reminders. Well, what is curious?
Connection, maybe?
Connection? That's very close to it. It's very close. What became number 1 that was number 10 was loneliness. The circles change, and we're going to talk about that. The people in our lives change radically in our retirement for a variety of reasons. And there was the fear at year 10 that they were going to be left alone. So how do you deal with those kind of issues? Well, let's talk about some of those things, and we'll deal with that issue as we go through this process. But I want us to really take a look at more of the social issues that you're going to confront. Some of the myths of going into retirement. Now, I'm not going to go through every one of these, but because they're all kind of interpolations of how these myths work, but we all go into retirement with certain numbers of myths. For example, some of us believe that because we've been successful in our lifetimes up until now, then why worry about retirement? You know, I've always been successful at what I've done, relatively speaking. Never had too difficult a time accomplishing it. So retirement should be the same thing. It's not that radical a situation. The second area is those of us who believe that the hobby that we've had, whether it's a little bit of woodworking or, in my wife's case, for example, she makes doll clothes to give to children. Any of those kind of things that we do, we figure we can turn into a lucrative business in retirement. Generally what happens, though, that what was a very wonderful hobby, suddenly when you have all the time to dedicate to it, no longer is so much fun as it once was, and the glow disappears. Now, why so much time in dealing with retirement? Well, everybody always believes there's going to be plenty of time for everything. But the reality is, for those of us who are clergy or in clergy families, time is a very different commodity in retirement than it is in active life. Now, all of you, I'm sure, do not work more than a 35 or 40-hour week. I mean, whoever heard of anybody in the ministry spending, 60 to 70 hours a week doing the work of ministry? But you do, and that's going to change rapidly in one event at annual conference when you retire. Suddenly, where your days were filled with up to 60, 70 hours a week with very concrete and real activity over which you probably did not have a lot of control, now you're going to be in a situation where we have total control of all that time. And that's usually the first crisis that happens in retirement, because people think that these things they carry with them in retirement are going to automatically fill the space. For example, the hobby. For example, I'm going to sell a little bit of real estate. I'm going to stay busy, no problem. I'll just keep pushing things right along. I've done everything in life that I was supposed to do now. I've paid up the dues in a sense, so now I can move on to enjoy the fruits of my retirement. Or you can go into retirement with the attitude, something like my brother had, he's still living, by the way, who was convinced that retirement means early death, that once you retire, you die. He also had the belief, or still does unfortunately, that if you write a will, it's a guarantee that you will die. Well, guess what? You're going to die whether you have a will or not, so you may as well prepare for it by having one done in advance. But even beyond that, the business that if you think money will go further in retirement, it doesn't go any further than it did in your active life. These we talked about. Big time conception we talked about. All right, so those are indeed some of the myths that we take into retirement. We just don't live the same way in retirement that we did in our active lives. These we talked about. Big time conception we talked about. All right, so those are indeed some of the myths that we take into retirement. We just don't live the same way in retirement that we did in our active lives. And part of the reason is because of the amount of time that is now at your disposal that you did not once have. Now, let's look at the phases of retirement, because retirement is not a static situation. There is the time of transition that we start with, and that transition time is trying to figure out how to get past the issues that we're not comfortable with in retirement. The simple way to deal with transition is to prepare for it, to be ready for it. This workshop is called R-10 for a reason. It can take up to 10 years to be sure you have a plan in place that you think is workable. There are certain areas of change in your life that you're going to be dealing with during this period of transition. Finances, your housing, your wellness, your requirements for that will change, role changes that are going to occur. Your living environment is going to occur. And you're going to be continuing to adapt to life changes within that retirement period. And those changes can happen fairly rapidly around you. Now, you're in the transition stage now. The next stage is active living in retirement. This is the stage most people want to have and keep having until the day that we die. And that's the time when you can do your thing. The time when you can be the most creative you have ever been in your life, because you do have the opportunity to shape a good deal of who you are and what you will be. And we're going to talk more about that later on. Then there's going to be that time period of slowing down. We all reach that point at some point in our lives in retirement. It's the time when we throw off the pressures that are around us and begin to focus more and more on the immediate and the internal. It becomes more focused on what we are becoming and less on where we have been. It's also a time when the circle around home and family seems to become much more important. And it becomes a time to find balance in your life, to make things even out. Lastly, there's a period of assisted living. Now, assisted living is a time period when you may not be in total disability to live your life, but there are circumstances that occur that require some level of assistance from others in order to have the kind of life that you want at that particular stage. It's also a time when you want to take care of unfinished business, and all of us have unfinished business, whether it's relationships or whatever. It's an important time to complete reconciliations, to deal with relationships that perhaps have been strained or broken in your life. It's also a time, and this is the hard part, to learn how to be more open to assistance from family, friends, and professionals. We who have been the support for so many others usually find it most difficult to accept assistance for ourselves when it is critical and important to have it. Now, when is the right time? When is the right time? Right time depends on at least 5 different factors. What is the status of your health? How many of you had a physical in the last year? How many of you plan to have a physical every year? Good. Now that should be 100% next time you ask that question. It's really important to understand the status of your health and how to deal with it, to take the recommendations of healthcare providers, to be sure that you're doing what needs to be done to maintain yourself at the highest possible level of good health. And that can be hard. Now in my be almost 5 years of retirement, and I have to admit that the physical side of it sometimes becomes the side you don't want to deal with. They seem to find more things wrong. Either they have more time or somebody has more time, but they keep seeming to find more things that are wrong and need to be adjusted. And just when I figured out that my blood pressure was exactly where it was, last week a new study came out to say, no, it should be below 120. So my 125 no longer looks like it's golden. So the constantly moderation in your diet, monitoring your diet and your health to be sure that you're doing the things that are necessary. Number two that you want to look at is where are you in your career right now in terms of your transition, you're deciding the right time. Are you at that point where retirement's next month? In other words, next June. Are you at the time where you're really highly satisfied with what you're doing and just want to keep on doing it for a while longer? There is no magic age. Some need to retire earlier because their satisfaction level and what they're feeling right now is not adequate for them and they want to try something different. Others feel they want to keep on moving. What are your future options and possibilities that you could look at in terms of what you would do if you weren't doing what you're doing now? Number three, what are your family responsibilities? Are the children reared? Have they stopped boomeranging? And boomeranging, which seems to be a real strong factor in families today. Not necessarily a bad thing, but something you better be prepared for. Do you have responsibility for other family members that you must take into account? Remember, many of the people who are retiring today are retiring with parents who are already in need of care. And you also at the same time have younger children. By that I mean they're probably in their 30s and 40s, but they still need some kind of care and attendance at that point in their lives. For many years we were called the sandwich generation between the two. Well, that's extending even further because now with life expectancies increasing and people living longer, the expectations of your responsibilities may continue longer than you think for, particularly with older parents, or if you have disabled children that must be cared for in particular ways. The fourth issue is the financial status. Can you afford to retire? Will supplemental income be necessary if indeed you do retire? And if supplemental income is necessary, what kind of supplemental work is it that you want to do? Number five, what alternative activities do you have in mind for a creative use of time? Watching 139 episodes of Groucho Marx's You Bet Your Life is really not the best use of creative time in retirement. And yet some people just literally try to stop. So think ahead to what you're going to do in terms of the freedom of activity that you will have and how those activities become a part of your life. Now, an important factor in this whole thing is the importance of work. We really don't understand or recognize how important work is to us. It provides income, we know. It provides structure. Remember what I mentioned? Your weeks are pretty well already planned because it gives you structure. It gives you identity. One of the favorite things I love to do is to ask a group of clergy to identify yourselves to me, explain who you are without identifying your career or your family. Tell me who you are without talking about yourself and your career or your family. And most clergy find that very difficult to do. Their identity is really wrapped up in who they are and their work identity. Well, if you take that identity away, what happens? I remember, for example, when my wife and I moved from dealing and serving a local church to working with Mark, believe it or not, at the General Board of Pensions. And moving to a situation where we were no longer the pulpit family, we were now in the pew. And I remember attending church the first Sunday with the two kids that were still at home with us and asking them after church what they thought. And their first words were, "Nobody said hello to us." And I thought, that's right. As a parish family, when you showed up in town, you had an immediate support group. You were immediately welcomed as part of the family in the life of the church and made to feel that because your father happened to be the pastor of the church. It does not happen when you move from pulpit to pew. And for most retirees, it doesn't happen. Yes, to be very honest with you, you may be recognized a few times to be asked to substitute as a preacher. You may be asked to help serve communion, but it probably won't extend much beyond that. And you'll find in a very short number of years, even those requests will disappear. So who are you going to be in terms of your work without that identity? It also provides social contact. Through your work, it's how you live out your life, making yourself known and knowing other people and being known by those people. And work also provides a psychologically satisfying moment in your life that you have done something, you have achieved, you have shown the world what you can do. And again, your identity and your psychological satisfaction with yourself comes from that work. So how are you going to substitute for that work in your retirement? Guess what? There is not going to be a little old person standing at the door on Sunday morning when you go out of church telling you how wonderful the sermon was, even though you knew it stunk. That always felt good. You always used to say, I'm sure every one of us has complained, I wish they wouldn't say that because I'm not sure it's sincere. But when it isn't said anymore, you begin to realize, my gosh, what happened? Something radically changed here, and I didn't know it was going to. So think about all of those things as you look at how important work is for you and decide how you are going to substitute for it. Now, we've always said there are three classic models to deal with work and retirement. One is, don't want to do it. I just want a pure, simple life of leisure in retirement. And some people can do that. They find very strong meaning in just doing these activities. Others need something out there that is structured and organized, not necessarily to make money, but some form of organized work. And those are the people who have become really good volunteers because they want that kind of structure in place where they can gain a new identity. I remember one pastor talking to me who came to one of these workshops when we first started doing them, who several years later came to me. He said it was an eye-opening moment for him when somebody recognized him for his volunteer work and didn't know he was a clergy. He said that was a satisfying moment. He felt he had succeeded in a way he never knew it would be important. There are also those people who in retirement want to work either because they need the income or because, and this is important, they feel they need some kind of reward to show that they are doing good things. And the salary becomes kind of a way of acknowledging that. There's nothing wrong with that. It's a way of being acknowledged for what you are doing. But nonetheless, work will still be an important part of your life, but you're in control of it, and you need to decide how you're going to do it. So begin to think now about the substitute, because it won't be there waiting for you as the next appointment always was. Now it's your turn. It's also a time in retirement, as you in that first stage to have a successful transition, is to unclutter your life a bit. How many of you watched on HGTV tiny houses? Do you know what I'm talking about? Tiny houses? I'm sorry, I can't picture myself going down that small. I mean, my wife and I and our family used to tent when we were younger. You know, you get in the tent out and you pack it up and away you go for your 2 weeks vacation somewhere in a tent. And it was always fun, but I have to admit, it was always nice to get home and stretch out a bit and have some more space. These people are choosing to live in those little tiny things. But there is an essence to that, what they're doing, though, that is really important in several ways. One, look, I was guilty of this as anybody. How many of you are still carrying around the library that you began 20 years ago or 30 years ago? And how many of you know very well you're never going to go back and read any of those books again? Then why are you carrying them around? Look at where our security is. As long as I got my books, I'm secure. God forbid I should give them away. But anyway, it's that way with all kinds of stuff that we carry around with us. The physical stuff that we don't need anymore. Think of a wonderful way to gift a lot of people, even with your 40-year-old concordance of the Bible. You know, there are wonderful ways to make gifts of a lot of things that you have carried around, and they're just not appreciated anymore, so why do it? And especially if now you're going to be moving into a new home and so forth, you know what it's been like in the past. It's time to put all those books in the church hall and say, take what you want, and the rest you give away to whoever wants them. You as clergy also have had a lot of organizational involvements beyond just the local church, generally involved in community organizations, etc. Do you really need all of those organizational connections any longer? Are there ways to have some connections that are very meaningful to you and to focus more on them and give them more importance in your life than the ones you have having to go to Rotary, having to go to Kiwanis, or whatever around the community? Also, and this is the selfish part of retirement, why can't you kind of break away from the overly demanding relationships? Sometimes they're in your life, and it's time to say, I can't do this anymore. I just can't do it anymore. And I need to break away and clean up my life a bit. Now, another good part of transition is to try out the plan that you created for yourself. Live it for a 2, 3, or 4 week period and see if you even like it. My wife and I did that with housing to start with. We did not know where we were going to live. Now, I admit, we were born in Maine. We were used to real cold weather. I don't want that cold again in the rest of my life. But we missed the seasons. We kind of like seeing fall come, and it actually doesn't just get dark green, it gets colorful. And so we began thinking of where we'd like to live, and we thought about North Carolina and Tennessee. Somewhere in that area we thought would be nice. So we spent 5 years trying out different places. We'd go and stay for a week or two and do it as if we were living there. Go to the library, look for what the cultural activities were in the area, the sports activities, see where the medical services were and so forth, shop at the local stores, and see what we liked. And then within 3 years out, we had narrowed it down to 3 locations that we thought we would want to live. Then we narrowed it down to 2, and that was the toughest. We had narrowed it down. We wanted to either live in the Charlotte, North Carolina area or the Asheville area. And we really thought those had what we wanted, both of them. Then we realized, retirement, you still need a place to get away to. And so we decided, for most year-round activities, Charlotte was better for us. And that for the getaway, we now take at least 1 day a week just to get away from the community, and we go to Asheville, or we go to Black Mountain, or we go to a little town north of Weaverville, or wherever. We go to get away just to have a nice lunch, a nice dinner, and sometimes stay overnight and come back home. But you do still need a place to get away. So we chose, the town is actually Huntersville, which is the next town north of Charlotte. So we tried it out so that we would feel comfortable that when we made the move, we weren't going to be unfamiliar with what it was. I hate to tell you this, guys and ladies. We also did not want to live where there were 900,000 other clergy. We wanted to live with a community where we weren't necessarily well known, because we wanted to expand our relationships, and we weren't going to do that if we stuck with the same groupings. And so we deliberately chose not to be in that kind of a grouping. If I want to see Methodist clergy, all I got to do is drive to Lake Junaluska. I've been there twice in 5 years. But not that I don't miss it, but it's just, I prefer, I know my clergy friends very well, and we see each other on a different basis. So try it out. And you'll discover, number one, you're going into retirement on a far more healthy basis and more active basis than retirees did 25 years ago. You're going into it wanting to do things. You would be surprised how many people our age we meet on the hiking trails around the Charlotte area and into Black Mountain and up in Blowing Rock. And we have found new friends and companionship that way. But they're all active. And I hate to say it, some of them are 10 to 15 years older than I am and still out there doing this stuff. So it's not something that's going to pass away quickly. You're going to be very active, so take that into account. Are you going to be able to find the places you want to go? It is not sitting on the porch and just sitting and rocking. You need to have things there that you're going to want to do. As you transition, begin to think about the professionals who can help you make the transition, particularly financial counselors. How to make that budget work and so forth. Also, legal counselors to get ready everything you need to get ready in order to have in place your plans for the rest of your life, including the transition from this life. Who gets what and so forth. And maybe some mental health professionals. You may find quite seriously that it's somewhat of a shock to get into this kind of retirement setting, and you just may need to talk to someone. Find a good counselor to work through that. There are people out there who specialize in these kind of life transitions who can help you make some good choices. So if you're not sure, ask. That can be very important to you. And do not allow ungrounded fears and misconceptions ruin your life. The fear my money will run out before I die, my family will abandon me when I can no longer care for myself, or my brother's great and favorite, everything's downhill from here. One of the best things to do is to build yourself a support system. Your support system has a variety of relationship types. If you see that diagram that's in there, similar types of relationships exist through your support system, but some are more remote or less frequently experienced. In other words, it's as if you're in a circle, on the inner circle, and you're the retiree, and your relationships exist in all these areas. Some are closer to who you are, others are further away. You will probably find as you go into retirement that some of those who are very close to your circle in the middle will now be further away because you're not running in the same place. You're in a different location. So some friends you may have known for years suddenly become more important. My wife, for example, has just reconnected this last 2 years with one of her college roommates. Neither one had been able to locate the other for years. And then found each other through a reunion at the school and been going back and forth to New Hampshire to visit. And they have really picked up, their words were, we picked up right where we were back when we were in college. So that person had been way out on the fringe, almost forgotten, who now is very close to the middle for my wife. Neglected relationships, a time for dealing with those. Examine who they are in those neglected relationships. Maybe they're relationships you really want to get back to and to redevelop, to make more important in your life again. This is not going to be a static situation. It is going to change as your circumstances change and as you move from a very active lifestyle to a less active lifestyle. So don't expect that what is happening now will always be the case. Now, where do you start with this model? Where's the place to start? The best place to start is with your spouse if you have one. Retirees have the second highest rate of divorce of all age groups. That's scary. Second highest rate of divorce of all age groups. It's as if what happened kind of a thing. What happened was, remember I talked about the 60, 70, 80 hours that now are filled and suddenly aren't filled? People begin to get to know a lot more about each other than they ever wanted to know. And in some cases, they're not very happy with what they've gotten to know. But no, it's because it is a time for such huge transition, it can be a very threatening and frightening time for both parties. So be aware that that's a very real factor in retirement. It is time to re-acknowledge who your spouse is, if you have one, your partner, if you have one, and to re-explore what that relationship means. I mean, my wife and I, we had the first couple of years were a little rough until I decided I really did need to get involved and stay involved with some things and decide who I was, and she was deciding who she wanted to be. You know, there was a lot of give and take, and it's a joyful experience once you realize it's okay. We now realized, I mean, for the first time probably in our lives, even though we'd had bumpy roads before that at times, as all relationships do, we probably were still expecting ourselves to be who we were when we got married years ago. And we realized how much we had changed and how much our needs had changed, our wants had changed, and now it was time to really explore them together. And that's what we've been doing. And it's fun, and I'll say a little bit more about that later. But you got to build that support system, and you have to work at it, and you got to be willing to let it change and grow. Now, family relationships, because there is more time together. How do you deal with those relationships? Especially, again, I'm addressing those right now who have partners, and I realize that whether you are married or whether you have a partner in life on another basis, simply as a close friend or whatever, it's something to recognize that when you have that time, what are the activities that you now do that your partner doesn't want to do anymore in retirement? You know, the person retiring generally gets all the attention. the one retiring from the position, the paid position. The person who is on the side of the clergy person, who may also have a professional career, but doesn't get the full public focus in the same way that the clergy person does. So generally everything is aimed at what the clergy person is going to do. But the spouse is as affected by this as anyone else when you go into retirement. So what are you going to do about the activities that you've been doing? Do you still want to do them, each of you? Explore what new activities you and your spouse would like to be able to do yourself together. What are going to engage you as a couple? What are engage you as intimate friends? And what activities will engage you each separately after you retire? One of the big mistakes that goes into retirement is the sudden feeling that you have to do everything together. And you don't. You still need that separate time. You still need those separate opportunities for your own life. So decide what they can be. Household responsibilities, they're up for grabs. Anybody's going to do what they're going to do. Now, adult children. Adult children is a fun area. Why I like it is because years back I went to a workshop in San Francisco. It was on personnel management. And I was staying at a Sheraton hotel, and at the time there was a tour company who was starting a different kind of tour grouping as an experiment. They had asked a grandparent and a grandchild to take this tour together. It was a 10-day tour, and it was a free situation. They wanted to know whether this was going to work. So they tried it out. And those of us who were because we were in personnel management, the suggestion was made that we sit in and listen to their debriefing at the end of the 10 days as a part of human dynamics. And so I did, and I thought it was fascinating. And it was relatively quiet at the beginning, but the comments began to come. And as they did, one would say, well, you know, it was really fun. We started out not sure how this was going to work. The grandchild was very uncomfortable with the process. What am I going to do, hang around this old person for the next 10 days? Not going to be interested in anything I want to do, kind of a thing. And then they figured it out. One person stood up and said, I think I got the key to why it worked. And she said, we discovered together we have a common enemy. Well, you see, the common enemy was, you know, the one in the middle. And dealing with adult children, as you know in many respects, is quite an experience. And it becomes a more interesting experience as you go into retirement. Notice, number one, you do have the opportunity in retirement to enjoy them a lot more than you ever did, because you don't have all the constraints that you once had. But also that conflict inevitably is going to be part of it. My daughter, who does live near us, this was not intentional, but because of her husband's work, my son-in-law's work, we happened to live in the same area. And my daughter, as we were getting settled in after moving up there, started suddenly calling every day and showing up at the house every day. And we thought, we lived in Lakeland for, you know, all her adult years as she was finishing college and everything, and even after that, and she didn't do that. Why suddenly is she showing up like this? I mean, we love our daughter, no question. We finally had to tell her, you know, we're okay. Being retired doesn't mean we're going to fall off the corner of the earth or fall down the stairs every night or something else. And she didn't even realize she was doing it unconsciously. She thought she should do that, stop in to see if we were getting along okay. Wonderful, but man, can that lead to a conflict? Because here she comes again, and what do we do now? So you've got to be open. You've got to be open with your adult children. You've got to talk to them, help them to understand what you're experiencing, and they're going to come to you for solutions because now you're the wise age that you are, and you've got to be a good listener at the same time. That is going to be a really dynamic and fluid situation as you get older and as they get older. Just learn to communicate more openly about serious matters. Don't allow yourself to be talked out of the things you want to do, like end-of-life plans, for example, or your changing physical and emotional needs. A friend of mine, for example, in my first church, her husband had died. She lived in a very large home, and she simply one day decided, enough of this. I don't need a 3-bedroom home. I want to live where there are other people like me, where I can talk and have things taken care of. She didn't dare talk about it with her kids, 3 children. She didn't know what they'd react. So she sold the house and moved into the other place and sent a change of address by mail to her kids. And knowing her kids as I do, who are my age, it was the best thing she could have done, because they would have been on her doorstep. How dare you sell the home place? And she wasn't going to go through that. So be open with them. Talk to them. Forget the old misunderstandings. Start anew. Everybody's got something they can improve on in that relationship. Discuss with children what it means for adult to be free. Do you remember the movement, Death of God? Do you remember that movement? That's really dating ourselves, folks. Sorry about that. The thing I got out of that I appreciated of that movement was this simple thing, that it was time to appreciate God not as our child, but as an adult, as we would an adult parent. I don't know if I'm saying that very clearly, but it is different when we look at God as we're the little child and God is the great parent. When you begin to look at God as an adult child to an adult parent, it's that kind of relationship with your adult children. Even though you want to tell them what to do, you can't. You've got to let them have their life and make their mistakes and make their successes and celebrate with them in that process. And they've got to allow you the same thing. They don't need to become your parent. And someday they may, but not at most of the points of your life in retirement. Now, change of end-of-life plans, especially important. I'm still hearing from people my age where they will not tell their kids what they want to have happen when they die. What's wrong with talking about how you want your body handled in death? You're going to think we're really weird, but we bought a gravesite to put our ashes in. Don't know why, but we kind of like the idea of someplace where the generations can go and see we did exist, maybe. So there's a gravestone with their names on it. And Nan and I went to the grave. It's up in Maine, of all places, but that's where we grew up. And we did a very probably stupid thing, but we did it anyway. We laid down on the ground in front of our gravestone and had someone take our picture. Yep. And we emailed it to our kids. And said, well, that's right. And told them this is where we want to be. And after you've cremated us and sold off or gotten rid of everything that we were in terms of our bodies, give away what's usable and cremate the rest and put the ashes there. And we were really pleased with their responses. They were relieved that we could treat it that way, number one. Number two, that we trusted their sense of humor to treat it that way. And that the decisions were made. So don't be afraid to do it and find a creative way. I love taking that picture. That drove them nuts for about a year. But, okay, moving right along. I don't want to take up too much time. This part you've already heard about, I'm sure. Leaving the church in retirement. What does it mean to live in the same community from which you retired? I don't know. I don't think I could do that. But I'm sure there are those of you who could. But if you do, it means a whole different relationship with the church if you're going to live in the same community from which you retire. That's especially an issue for clergy and their families, because there can be that tension between the new person coming in. All of that. I don't need to tell you that. You know what that means, and you've got to figure that out yourself, whether that's important. And if you retire to another community, how do you share with another congregation, particularly the pastor or pastors, your experience and skills and their availability if they want them, and not be offended if they say thank you, but no thank you. They have their reasons for how they're doing ministry where they are. They are not obligated to you in any fashion to make use of your experience as a clergy person. And it's nice when they do once in a while, I agree, but they're not obligated. So it's nice to be available, but not otherwise. What should you do if the pastor of that church doesn't even want to recognize you as another pastor? Work on it. Then what will be your relationship to the district and conference in which you live? That's an issue you've got to decide. It does change rapidly. I admit I have not been back to annual conference in June very frequently since I left, but it feels strange to go back. Yes, I see the people I know, but I suddenly no longer cared about those votes. Which automatically translated to me to saying, I don't think I'm really involved here anymore. At first that was kind of upsetting to me, but then I realized, no, I don't have to be. I'm not seeing anything, I don't really have to vote on the budget. It's not important that I do. So you just have to figure those things out. And know, again, it's going to change somewhat as you go along. Now, the next area is the one that is usually the one you've been waiting for, is sex and aging. I mentioned earlier that it's the retirement is that period when there are the second most divorces as a group. But it's curiously also the group that reports higher sexual activity than only one other. There is more intimacy in retirement than probably most of your middle years lives. A lot of it is because of opportunity and time. A lot of it is because of rediscovering who each other is, because you had the time. But indeed, there is tremendous intimacy that occurs. As I said, my wife and I are talking about things now we haven't talked about in years. And enjoying it. I mean, seriously, reveling in what we're discovering again. And the sexual aspect is absolutely wonderful. It's great. It does continue. And it's just that we feel closer now than we did probably 25 years ago. Much more physically close. Moments of intimacy are very important. And I don't just mean the sexual total act itself necessarily. I mean just the touching and the holding and being together and feeling a closeness that you just hadn't felt for a while. It's a tremendous time. So don't be afraid of it, and it's exciting and explore it. If there are issues, deal with them. But don't be surprised if you hear couples who are getting divorced because of it. They make the joke on television about assisted living centers being a hotbed of sexual activity. It's no joke. They are. They really are. It's a fact of living that goes on. So just be aware of how that fits into your life. Welcome it as still a strong part of your life, and go for it. Now, in light of all that, I want to quickly talk now about just three little things. One, active living. Remember, it's time to do your thing. Measure your attitude. Accept responsibility that what happens from here on now is yours. And hold on to your freedom. Most importantly, keep your sense of humor. You need a lot of humor in retirement. I recently, how would you want to call it, sprained the flex muscle in my hip. I mean, it hurts like hell, to be honest, most of the time. I thought I'd never reach that point where I'd have a body ache like that. That would hurt. So what's the first thing my loving daughter and her husband do? Buy me a cane and say, here you go, old man. So can't imagine where they got that from. So keep your sense of humor about all of this. Live with style and do something unexpected in your retirement. Communicate a lively and positive image to others. Don't copy a lifestyle. Don't be like anybody else. Be you. Create your own lifestyle. Help other generations. This is critical. Help other generations appreciate the values that you hold. Why do you do what you do? You're in a prime place to be able to share that. Church school classes, you name it. You can share it in so many ways. What a new ministry that is. Nothing constrains you. Don't allow others to push you into becoming bored, unhappy, unchanging, passive, discarded, negative in retirement. Because there is that attempt. Stereotypes will push it more than anything else. Just don't let them do it to you. Look at your environment and so forth. One of the real problems with retirees as they get older is not keeping aware of appearance and environment. The shirt that you wore on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday is just as good to wear on Friday, even though there are a few food stains. I mean, who's going to know? Who's going to know? I think I changed my underwear on 4th. That personal appearance becomes an issue. It's probably a time, if you're a male, to want to try growing a beard. go for it. But it is not a time just to become slovenly. And that happens. For some reason, we forget that our appearance is important. It may be because people aren't telling us that we look nice. A lot of times you have to be reminded. My wife is a great one for saying to people, you know, you look really good. And then does supposedly mean for your age? No, not for your age. You look really good. And you'd be surprised how many people just kind of light up when she says that. You can do that for others, but it needs to be done for you as well. Just to be reminded that you look good, that you need to be clean and kempt, and that the house doesn't need to become a mess. I saw it happen to my father. My father, who I swore wore a white shirt and tie to bed, as he got very old, was having trouble just keeping things clean. And you know what I mean. It just happens, kind of a thing. So be willing to share with your children or other relatives or close friends. You know, tell me once in a while whether I'm getting sloppy. Tell me if my house is a mess. Be honest with me. Am I still keeping my act together? Because you want to be a symbol of what a healthy, active retirement lifetime is like. But there comes that point when slowing down becomes important. And what becomes important then is housing, medical care, transportation, and support. It becomes really important. When you look for housing, for example, in retirement, begin to think ahead a bit. And we chose our retirement house now based on the next 10 years. Knowing we're probably going to make another decision somewhere down the road that we're going to need a different kind of housing. But if we don't, wonderful. But if we do, we're preparing ourselves for that. It's going to change. We also chose where we are because we wanted to be near medical care. You know, I've had 2 heart attacks. You knew that. And we did not want to live way out in the rural countryside somewhere with no ambulance service, just to be cautious. My wife would have a fit. So we chose to live where medical services are available. Also chose an area where public transportation is available. I mean, I dread the day, I know, okay, if I live long enough, when I won't be able to drive. But what do I do? How do I get from place to place? And I'm also so stupidly proud, I'd have a hard time calling somebody to say, can you take me to whatever? I want public transportation so I can do it myself. So take those things into account, and that there are people there who can support you in retirement. Home care is the industry of the future, as you know. And believe me, find a place that has good home care. We never know when our spouse or loved ones are going to need that kind of assistance. It comes at any age, so be prepared for it. Lastly, is when we need assisted living. When you really have to throw off all those things and accept and deal with the integrity of your identity. I don't know if that last slide I've got up there, if the picture will show or not, but it's the one I always love, is the Monet's garden at Giverny. Monet discovered something really important to me, and it's something that we will discover, each of us, as we grow older. Because I'm not prepared yet for any of what I've talked about, because I'm still moving along. But someday, I know, as the focus narrows and as the home becomes more important, he discovered that the beauty of life was best discovered in what was right at your fingertips in your backyard garden. He saw the beauty of life there in the smallest of things, and he conveyed that to the world through his paintings, even when he was nearing his own death. He kept painting his garden, because that's where beauty was to be seen in that time. He didn't have the ability to see beyond it. He was stuck there. Well, that's what each of us do. We come to focus on what we are, what integrity we have, and what I hope you discover and see in yourself and in each other is something as beautiful as the garden at Giverny. Look at the time we are given to build something that is that beautiful. My prayer for you is that in the retirement years, you cultivate it, you nurture it, you water it, so that when you look at it, you will see the beauty of the garden before you. Best luck in retirement.